evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm extremely happy to again be here to introduce these two very important part of Italian community, Mara Boccaccio and Peter Anderson. And tonight we're going to celebrating Dante Alighieri, the first canto of Dante Alighieri. Before I leave the stage to these two very important persons, I'd like to say a few words about the Comites selection of the Italian community. The next 3 December there is the Comites election. I don't know if you know about or if you don't know about. If you don't know about, this is the right moment to know. And if you are ready to give your support to the Italian community, because it's a very important moment for the Italian community, because the election of the Comites is something very, very important. Because the Comites is, I can say, the power of the community and the reflection of the community. And you must support the new Comites, because the Comites is a reflection of the community. I'd like to push more for all people must give the vote to the Comites. And don't be stay there and don't do nothing and then complain about the community, don't know nothing, don't do nothing, because everyone must stand and give the vote for someone else, someone, but must vote. It's very important. This is the right moment for the election time. Now I leave the stage to these two very important persons, Mara Boccaccio, Mara legge Dante, and Professor Anderson. Make comments what she said. Thank you so much. Grazie. Enjoy.
Ragazzi, grazie per l'opportunità. È sempre un piacere e un onore parlare su Dante. Mara si chiama Mara Boccaccio e quindi Boccaccio legge Dante. It's important to understand that this is a Boccaccio, and that Boccaccio has been, as a name, involved with the broadcasting of Dante from the very earliest time. So across the 721 years, or whatever it is, since the poem was written, or whatever, Boccaccios have been looking after this particular text. And it's Mara's extraordinary feat and opportunity now to provide a recitation of the all-important first canto of the Commedia, which will provide the opportunity for me to make a few genuflectory remarks, whatever, about this extraordinary poem.
Grazie. So I'm not Benigni first, if you watch Benigni, but I try my best. So I try to guide you through the first step of Dante journey. Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita mi ritrovai per una selva oscura, che la diritta via era smarrita. Ahi, quanto a dir qual era e cosa dura, è sta selva selvaggia e aspra e forte, che nel pensier rinnova la paura. Tanto è amara che poco è più morte. Ma per trattare del ben che vi trovai, dirò delle altre cose che vo scorte. Io non so ben ridir come v'entrai, tant'era pien di sonno a quel punto, che la verace via abbandonai. Ma poi che fu ai piedi un colle giunto, laddove terminava quella valle, che m'avea di paura al cor compunto, guardai in alto e vidi le sue spalle, vestite già dei raggi del pianeta, che mena dritto altrui per ogni etalle. Allor fu la paura un poco queta, che nel lago del cor m'era durata, la notte che passai con tanta pietà. E come quei che con lena affannata, uscito fuor dal pelago alla riva, si volge all'acqua perigliosa e guata, così l'animo mio che ancor fuggiva, si volse a retro a rimirarlo passo, che non lasciò giammai persona viva. Poiché posato un poco il corpo lasso, ripresi via per la piaggia deserta, sicché il più infermo sempre era il più basso. Ed ecco, quasi al cominciar dell'erta, una lonza leggera e presta molto, che di pel maculato era coperta, e non si partia dinanzi al volto, anzi impediva tanto il mio cammino, ch'io fui per ritornare più volte volto. Tempera dal principio del mattino e il sol montava in su con quelle stelle, che eran con lui quando l'amor divino mosse di prima quelle cose belle. Sica bene sperarne era cagione di quella fiera la gaetta pelle, l'ora del tempo e la dolce stagione. Ma non che si paura non mi desse la vista che m'apparve d'un leone. Questi parea che contra me venisse, con la test'alta e con rabbiosa fame, sì che parea che l'aere ne tremesse, ed una lupa che di tutte brame sembiava carca nella sua magrezza e molte genti fe già viver grame, questa mi porse tanto di gravezza con la paura che uscia di sua vista, che io perdei la speranza dell'altezza. E quale quel che volentieri acquista e giugna il tempo che perderlo face, che in tutti i suoi pensieri piagne e s'attrista, tal mi fece la bestia senza pace, che venendomi incontro a poco mi ripigneva là dove il sole tace. Mentre ch'io ruvinava in basso loco, dinanzi agli occhi mi si fu offerto chi, per lungo silenzio, parea fu loco. Quando vidi costui nel gran deserto, miserere di me, gridai a lui, qual che tu sia, o d'ombra o d'uomo certo. Risposemi, non homo già fui, e li parenti miei furono lombardi, mantuani per patria han veduto. Nacqui su Giulio, ancor che fosse tardi, e vissi a Roma sotto il buon Augusto, nel tempo degli dei falsi e bugiardi. Poeta fui, e cantai di quel giusto figliuol d'Anchise che venne di Troia, poiché il superbo Ilion fu combusto. Ma tu, perché ritorni a tanta noia? Perché non sali il dilettoso monte, che è principio e cagione di tutta gioia? Or sei tu quel Virgilio e quella fonte, che spandi di parlarsi largo fiume, risposio lui con vergognosa fronte. O degli altri poeti onore e lume, vagliami il lungo studio il grande amore, che m'ha fatto cercarlo tuo volume. Tu sei lo mio maestro e il mio autore, tu sei solo colui da cui tolsi lo bello stile che m'ha fatto onore. Vedi la bestia per cui io mi volsi, aiutami da lei, famoso saggio, che ella mi fa tremar le vene e i polsi. A te convien tenere altro viaggio, rispose poi che lacrimar mi vide, se vuol campar d'esto loco selvaggio, che questa bestia per la qual tu gride non lascia altrui passar per la sua via, ma tanto lo impedisce che lo uccide. E ha natura sì malvagia e rieta, che mai non riempie la bramosa voglia, e dopo il pasto ha più fame che pria. Molti sono gli animali cui s'ammoglia, e più saranno ancora, finché il veltro verrà, che la farà morir con doglia. Questi non ciberà terra né peltro, ma sapienza, amore e virtute, e sua nazion sarà tra feltro e feltro. Di quella umile Italia fia virtute, per cui marì la Vergine Camilla, e Orialo, e Turno, e Miso di Ferute. Questi la caccerà per ogni villa, finché l'avrà rimessa nell'inferno, la onde invidia prima di partilla. Questi la caccerà per ogni villa, finché l'avrà rimessa nell'inferno, la onde invidia prima di partilla. Questi la caccerà per ogni villa, finché l'avrà rimessa nell'inferno, la onde invidia prima di partilla. Ond'io per lo tuo penso e discerno che tu mi segui, ed io sarò tua guida, e trarrotti di qui per loco eterno, ove odirai le disperata strida, vedrai gli antichi spiriti dolenti, che a seconda morte ciascun grida. E vederai coloro che son contenti nel fuoco, perché speran di venire, quando che sia, alle beate genti, alle quali poi, se tu vorrai salire, anima fia ciò più di me degna, con lei ti lascerò nel mio partire. Che quello imperador che la regna, perché fu ribellante alla sua legge, non vuol che in sua città per me si degna. In tutte parti impera e qui vi regge, qui vi è la sua città e l'alto seggio, oh felice colui cui vi elegge. Ed io a lui, poeta, io vi reccheggio per quello Dio che tu non conoscesti, a ciò che io fugga questo male e peggio, che tu mi meni là dove or dicesti, sicché io veggia la porta di San Pietro e coloro cui tu fai cotanto messi. Allor si mosse ed io li tenni dietro.
The title is wrong because it's not Mara reads. Boccaccio reads Dante. Boccaccio knows by heart.
Incredibile, sì, sì, sì.
Titolo della viaggio.
Bravissimo. And a wonderful continuance, as I say, of this Boccaccian custody or custodianship of the Dantean legacy. I think it's fantastic that the man who 700 years ago put the Divina in front of the Commedia or whatever should have this descendant. We are all sure she's a direct descendant, and that she should be able to take us through the recitation of such power, force, and intellectual precision. I think is extraordinary. Myra tells me that when she was 5 years old, she decided that she was going to be the second Boccaccio. So I hope that at some stage the Comites and the community of Italianists in Cape Town will get Boccaccio to read Boccaccio, because she is in fact a poet of extraordinary power and force in her own right. And you would do very well to hear some of the Italian poetry that's being written at the southern tip of the African continent as well. I'm going to say a kind of succession of digressionary things, and for those whose English is, everybody's English here is better than my Italian or whatever, that's the only apology that I'm going to really make for speaking in Italian. I do apologize, mi dispiace that it's not all in Italian, but Mara happens to be not only my compagna but also my Italian teacher, and she wouldn't let me speak Italian if I paid her a lot of money or whatever, for the sake of her own pride, which she richly deserves after that recitation tonight. There's a wonderful little line that's hanging. When I was a publisher, we call these lines that hang in the way they are disposed on the page, widows and orphans. This is called an orphan line, whatever there. It's on the second page of your handout. And it's where I'm going to begin and where I'm going to come back to, or it's where I'm going to suggestively begin with it and come back to in my digressionary remarks. E sua nazione sarà tra feltro e feltro. One of the great mysteries of the Commedia or whatever, about whom everybody has been puzzling for over 700 years, and I'm going to try and make an argument around that when we get to the end of what it is I have to say here today. The thing that an ordinary reader first wants to know about in respect of Dante's Commedia is, why is it not funny, given that it's called a comedy? And those of you who've been through a good Italian schooling will know very well that, of course, it's called a comedy fundamentally because it operates on the principles of classical comedy in the sense of having a dark and stormy and turbulent and distressing beginning, but a happy ending, as Dante is shown the beatific vision or whatever, and is introduced to the grace of salvation as it is revealed to him when he finally reaches Paradiso at the end in the company of Beatrice Portinari and is shown his way through. So it is really because of a classical understanding of what comedy's got to do, rather than the contemporary Netflix idea of comedy, which involves a fat American and a bus or whatever and a whole lot of school children. It's got nothing like that on offer at all. Nonetheless, there is a sense of comedy which comes down to us in all of this, whatever, which Dante does encapsulate very, very powerfully and vividly all the way through the poem. And it's that treatment of human folly which concerns Dante in great degree all the way through, whatever. He is concerned all the way through this poem with how humans mess up. Okay, and the degree in which they mess up. Sometimes, a lot of the time, in fact, he's extraordinarily vicious in the way in which he condemns particularly his contemporaries and the ones he doesn't like. Boy, does he get back at them in unpleasant terms, whatever. There's nothing that Dante holds back from when he needs to. But he's extraordinarily engaged with what we would now call human nature. And that idea of human nature is a very modern one. It's an idea that comes to us really almost after Charles Darwin, where we situate ourselves as a species in nature as these kind of advantaged monkeys, highly susceptible to viral contamination, all sitting here wearing masks because we're organic entities who are susceptible of infection and so on and so forth. We have this kind of naturalness about us, whatever. But we are also raised above nature, okay, made in God's image. And it's that particular attribute, okay, which brings us closer to God, which drives Dante all the way through this particular poem, and which he gives us clues about right from the very beginning, as I think I will spell out to you. One of the most extraordinary things about this first canto, and what makes it so important, I think, is the way that Dante begins, as they say in Latin, in medias res. He just begins the poem. Boom! Halfway along life's journey, okay, I came to in a dark wood, okay, and there was a god-awful leopard or whatever, and there was a terrifying lion or whatever, and there was an even more dreadful wolf and so on and so forth. Then I saw a man, and I didn't know whether it was a ghost or a man, and the guy said, man I was, but man I am no longer, or whatever. My parents were Lombardian or whatever, and Mantuan am I, from Lombardia, Mantua, and I was born under Julio or whatever, and grew up under the good Augustus and so on and so forth, at the time of the many and the lying gods and so on and so forth. And he begins this poem and sets us going in no uncertain terms, and spells out for us from the very beginning of this poem exactly what's going to happen, because Virgil says to Dante, what you're going to need to do is follow me if you want to get over this hill or whatever, and around these particular beasts which we will come to. Okay? Follow me on a different kind of journey. And that journey is going to take you through, okay, the world of those who wish they died a second death. It's so awful that they're living in this world of hell or whatever. It's going to take you through those or whatever who are cheerful enough within the burning hell that they find themselves in because they have a hope of salvation. So he's talking about purgatory or whatever. And finally, he says, I'm going to hand you over to one other. Right? We don't know at this stage that it's going to be Dante's beloved Beatrice or whatever, that comes down the line. But from the very beginning of this extraordinarily long poem, okay, written by a man 20 years younger than me, which gives me the quakes as I think about it or whatever, he sets out a roadmap, okay, for what becomes one of the most extraordinarily mapped metaphysical journeys in the history of humankind. There are famous paintings of the Dantean mountain. There are all kinds of diagrams that exist that try to suggest how and where Dante goes and at what stage and crosses this river and Matilda's waiting for him there and so on and so forth. We have this extraordinary layout. But it's all really there, okay, laid out simply with extraordinary precision in the very beginning of this particular poem. The other thing I want to draw your attention to as a general kind of point, whatever, before I begin thinking a little bit more about this canto, is the poetry of the poem itself. It's so easy to get lost in the philosophical abstraction and the brilliance of the wisdom of Dante that we lose sight, I think, all too quickly of the extraordinary musicality of this particular poem, for which Dante invents, okay, a canzonic form, the terza rima, okay, which has this rhyme scheme A, B, C, D, C, okay, and propels the poem forward and forward and forward and forward, okay, as it goes on and on and on and on and on. That's why Mara finds it so easy to recite, because she just has to remember the rhyme. The line she slightly remembers. But there is this extraordinary propulsive kind of force to the poem. And he ties that in very early on in this particular canzone, this particular canto rather, with an idea which I think is tremendously important to understanding the importance of Dante to us still today. When he begins to emerge and climb his way out of the diserta, he says that he is always putting his weight on the lower foot. Do you remember that, or whatever, as he moves himself forward onto the upper foot? I think what Dante is talking about, and the terza rima does this too, it always puts its weight on the first rhyme as it reaches towards the second or echoing rhyme as it goes forward. Dante places his foot on the base of experience, what he knows in this world, before the other leg reaches out in imagination to that which he doesn't yet see. And that which he doesn't yet see then becomes the next basis of experience, and so he moves forward. So too the music of the poem is constantly moving off the back foot of experience onto the front foot of imagination. Okay? And that is something new in world literature. Dante is arrogating to himself a new way of thinking about the way we can treat of the world as an intellectual project. No longer, despite this being doxologically a deeply Catholic vision, okay, informed by the church fathers, informed by the doxologies, the doctrines of the church is handed down, nonetheless, Dante roots his voyage so dramatically and so personally and so psychologically in his own experience, okay, that he has always got that one human foot on the ground in the experience of the political strife between Guelph and Ghibelline in his native Florence, on the experience of the love between Paola and Francesca, in the experience of whatever the case may be. And from these actual instances, he moves that imaginary foot up to the next level, there finds purchase and new experience and moves on. And so the rhymes move on in that A, B, A way, all the way through the poem. So the poem is itself climbing up the rhymes as the rungs of the ladder or whatever that are going to rise up and up and up and eventually get him up to that stratospheric level or whatever, where he becomes finally in the Paradiso constantly protesting to us that he has no words. He has no words. I have no words for what I saw. I have no words for what I saw. And yet, the joke is on us. In that sense, it's a Commedia, in that sense, whatever, because he does have these extraordinary words and he does supply that amazing vision. So Dante plunges us in, as I suggested, into this world of beasts, okay, this dark wood, okay, this world of life, the shade of Virgil, and so on and so forth, and also delineates the whole structure of the journey as it's going to take place, which is the structure of the poem as well. Now, a great deal has been written about the allegorical and philosophical significance of the middle of life's path or whatever, and the nature and significance of the dark wood in which Dante finds himself, and I'll digress briefly to talk about those kinds of things. But I want to assert something first, very, very powerfully and insistently to you. Just as I have said that Dante is always moving off that pied basso or whatever, that bottom leg or whatever, of experience or whatever, into that mounting leg that climbs towards the beatific vision of imagination or whatever. So Dante is consistently asking of us to understand his poem on a variety of levels. There is all the way through this a philosophical poem, a poem rooted in Catholic philosophy, Catholic doctrine, okay, particularly influenced by the doctrinal kind of donation of Aristotle into the Middle Ages and Thomas Aquinas and so on and so forth. It's all there, and Dante's scholarly, and he knows all of that kind of stuff. There is also a very medieval vision which is allegorical. These various beasts, okay, stand for various things. We're told famously that the leopard stands for lust, and that the lion stands for pride, and that the she-wolf stands for avarice, okay? The sin of desiring and acquiring material preferment and power in the world and so on and so forth. And Dante is much more afraid of that particular beast than he is of the other ones. He's a bit scared of lust. He knows he's fallible on that level, and we know that too because he's kind to the sinners, Paolo and Francesca, when he meets them in the second circle of hell. Dante seems to be very gentle about those whose biological urges have caused them to stray slightly. There's no doubt about that. Whatever. But Dante's particularly worried about avarice, okay, and pride at this particular stage. Because, after all, he is setting out on a quest in this particular poem, which is itself, okay, in danger of superbia. Okay, there's a danger in Dante's particular project that he is blasphemously taking on, okay, a vision, right, that rightly belongs to St. John of Patmos, okay, or the Gospel of Luke, or the letters of Peter, or Paul, or whatever the case may be, the blessed apostles, or whatever. And here he is insinuating himself into the tradition of those who've had the visionary religious experience, or whatever, and bruiting it abroad in a poem which he knows is going to become world famous. And we're going to come back to that in due course. There is all the way through Dante's Commedia this extraordinary self-confidence, okay, of a poet who knows that his poem is a work of genius and will outlast time, okay? One only has to read on and on in this particular poem to feel that with Dante all the way through. So, in the middle of life's journey, okay, some people have said this has got to do with Aristotelian philosophy. Aristotle says life is a middle stage between the death that came before life and the death that comes after life, whatever. So in the middle of life means merely to be living in some sense. Yes, Dante encompasses this particular vision. There's no doubt about that, okay? No doubt about that. Allegorically, perhaps there is the sense of a kind of sense of the political middleness of an Italy that is beginning to work its way out of the chaos of the contestation between the papal regiments and the regiments of the empire and the various sectarian kind of conflicts that are splitting off so that you've got Guelph and Ghibelline, and then you've got the blacks and the whites. In Dante's own city, you've got this tumultuous middleness or whatever of conflict, and that's going on, and political readers of this poem, and then many of them, because it's a very political poem, tend to hark back to that. There's all of that, to be sure. But fundamentally, this is a poem, again, with that one back foot in real experience. And Dante is saying that this poem takes place in the middle of his life. Okay? In simple terms, it takes place when he is half of what the Bible accords us as the natural human span of 70 years and 10, which is an English way of saying 70 years. So Dante is 35, Dante's born in 1265, the poem is then set in 1300, a jubilee year in the Catholic calendar, the first jubilee that was declared, and so on and so forth, and the poem is religiously constituted and all of this kind of stuff. Yes, sure. But I have been through Dante's experience. I have found myself in a dark wood. I have found myself in the middle of my life. And the glory of Dante's poem is that it is speaking also at a psychological level. There is an philosophical level. There is an allegorical level. But there is also this human back foot, foot on the ground, experiential, psychological level in which Dante is quite simply confronting what we call a midlife crisis. He finds himself in the middle of his life, lost in a dark wood, when he's asking himself, what does it all mean? Which way should he go now? Okay, what adds up, okay, to a fulfilled life, to a life, as it were, pleasing to God, to an accurate life, okay? There's an allegorical level to the wood, yes, okay? Here are all these trees or whatever, knotted and gnarled in the forest. They represent the darkness of sin and temptation and all these kinds of things. We can extend that notion right back to Genesis and say, after all, in the Garden of Eden, was it not the tree, okay, of knowledge, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and so on and so forth, that gave rise to sin and so on and so forth? If that tree has not bred, okay, into a plethora of trees and constituted a forest by Dante's time or whatever, would that not make sense to understand the forest or whatever as the occasion of sin as it spilled out into the world in thousands of trees of knowledge of good and evil, all of them despoiled by humankind's, Adam and Eve's failure to obey God's commandment and so on and so forth. We can read the Christian allegory if we go along, but in simple terms, what I'm urging you to understand once again is that Dante is simply an ordinary guy in the middle of his life, suddenly wondering whether he should buy a big motorbike, okay, take a mistress. Can't do that because there's a leopard of lust that's driving him away. Okay, should he rise to become head of a corporation? Whoa, there's a she-wolf of avarice that's driving him away from that, whatever. Should he sit back and realize that the early canzone of the Vita Nuova and so on and so forth is sufficient glory or whatever for him to go abroad in the world as a well-known literary figure, whatever, superbia, pride or whatever, and there's the lion setting him back from that particular. What does he do with his life now? That is the simple project that I think he's experiencing as he finds himself lost in the selva oscura that he finds himself in. For us, reading 700 and something years after the poem is composed or whatever, there is another middleness to the poem, another in medias res which we can think about a little bit. And it's one which the poem itself conjures up, because the guide that Dante finds, okay, who is not a man anymore, okay, but was a man, is Virgil, whatever. And Dante looks over his shoulder to the past, to antiquity, which looms very large over this particular poem. It's a very important kind of provenance for all of Dante's thinking. He comes to talk about Virgil as my master and my author. And I want to talk a little bit about that, I think, in due course as well. Okay, so there is antiquity, all right, and there is the posterity of the poem, which I've been trying to insist to you, whatever Dante is quite convinced of all the way through this particular Commedia. If one reads the whole thing through, whatever, following the propulsions of the terza rima, the extraordinarily beautiful imagery from the reality of life that Dante finds himself situated in, you are aware, okay, you feel it as the burnished glow of the poem, that Dante knows his poem will outlast, okay, the ages in a certain sense. So there's this posterity. And then there's the middle, okay, where Dante finds himself. Somewhere between antiquity and somewhere between the future, where his life exists. And it's in the middle of that particular life, okay? So he's placing his particular poem, as it were, at the absolute fulcrum point, okay? The tipping point where the balance of the world can swing either way. It can tip towards hell, or it can tip towards paradise. It can tip into sin, or it can tip into grace, okay? That is the kind of mathematical or geometric equation that he's setting up in this particular instance. Right, we have the philosophical level that we need to read on, the allegorical level we need to read on, the psychological level that we need to read on, and we have the privilege, I'm arguing, to remember that Dante belonged to what he didn't call, but we do call, the Middle Ages. And it seems to me extraordinarily pertinently coincidental, okay, that the greatest work of art of the Middle Ages should begin with the word middle, right, within its first three words, okay? That seems to me absolutely extraordinary, that the Middle Ages had a middle sense about itself, okay, and that middle sense, whatever may have been an Aristotelian sense about life itself being bracketed by the dark patch of death before and death after, all of that may pertain, whatever, but fundamentally, okay, there is in Dante a powerful sense, an increasingly humanist sense, an increasingly anticipatorily Renaissance-y kind of sense of the importance of classical antiquity, right? But also, daringly, a sense of a future to come, okay? This is a religious world, a world that is constantly being enjoined to believe that the end of time is nigh, that the second coming is always going to happen at the turn of the centuries. If it didn't happen in the year 1000, it'll happen in the year 1300, which is exactly where Dante locates the poem in a fundamental sense. And yet Dante is slightly looking forward all the time. He's propelling this poem forward, okay? He has the poem with one foot back in experience, but there's another foot going forward into the future, into the imagined posterity of the poem as he constructs it. Well, we could say of these beasts that he meets, okay, allegorically speaking, okay, that they represent lust and pride and avarice. Fine. And nearly everybody in a school classroom would be taught that, right? But that is not what Dante himself said at any point. Dante wrote no commentary on his own particular work. This is merely what the scholars have imposed on Dante afterwards, and we cannot ever really know what Dante intended by these particular individuals, save the fact that he is plucking these particular animals out of the medieval heraldic systems, okay, in which they carry symbolic significances and so on and so forth. But once again, I want to urge you simply to say to yourself, what would you feel like, okay, if you found yourself driving down Marine Drive, okay, run out of cigarettes, 35 to 40 years old, having a midlife crisis, not knowing whether to buy a motorbike or take a mistress or whatever the case may be, and suddenly, or whatever, as it were, saw coming on towards you an enormous lorry, an incredibly fast motorcycle or whatever, and a Lamborghini all out of control. It's simply an evocation of the fear, the psychological fear, okay, of being somebody lost in time and space, lost in their own mind, lost and constrained or whatever, towards the objective of a good life as set forth by Catholic education or whatever, but not finding an easy purchase on that particular project. And the whole object of this particular poem for Dante is to find out for himself and relate to the world how it is, okay, to get around that particular problem. How it is that we, so clever, so rational, so brilliant, so much higher than the animals, so close to the angels, should nonetheless be so messed up so much of the time, despite the fact that back in 1300 the Bible told you what to do, the priests told you what to do, and so on and so forth. We have this cussed way of being to ourselves difficult. And the figure that he encounters, to which we move next, is the figure of Virgil, who represents above all rationality. And we know this not in the first canto so much as we know it in the second canto, when Dante actually enters into the Inferno and finds the first circle. And in the first circle of hell, he finds all the nicest people, all the people that you would really like to hang out with for eternity. There is Virgil's friend Horatio, who I would like to live with for all the rest of my life. I adore Horace. I'm a Horace man, not a Virgil man. And so there's Ulysses. There are all these wonderful people hanging around in the first circle of hell, who are all condemned to that, of course, because they predate Christianity, so they have no sense, or whatever, of the true God. They have been, as it were, born and bred, as Virgil says he has, or as Dante says he has, under the false and lying gods, or whatever, okay? Back in the days, Sub Julio, or whatever, in the days of the born Augusto, okay? So they're condemned to that part of the world. And what Virgil and Dante broker together of an understanding, okay, of what goes on in this of the first hells or whatever, is that you've got these supremely rational human beings, okay, who have, as it were, always Dante fits in some kind of kindness because he has a generosity of soul, who have the company of one another, right, all the time that they're stuck in this particular second hell or whatever, to converse with and rationalize, but who are tormented because the torments of the hells are always fitting, who are tormented by their reason and rationality, by the knowledge, the deep knowledge, that they have not the capacity to reach for what the Christian is able to reach for, and which Beatrice represents, which is faith rather than reason itself. What does our reason really prosper us when we are confronted in the middle of life's journey by a dark wood and find ourselves lost, okay? It is a simple kind of problem, and in confessional after confessional across the Catholic world, to this day, people must put their bums down on the board and say to the priest through the grill, Father, everything's fine, the kids are okay, I'm in a happy marriage, but I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm miserable, and I'm depressed, right? I teach at the University of Cape Town, where it has now become axiomatic that we are living in a pandemic of mental health problems. So we're all finding in this era of actual pandemic that the mental health problems of the world are all around us. It seems to be the curse, the affliction of our rationality, that we should suffer from this particular that afflicts Dante at this particular stage in his life. but it's Virgil. It's Virgil and nobody else who comes, as it were, out of the gloom or whatever, and supplies the first guide to Dante, okay, in taking him towards the beatific vision that he will eventually achieve or whatever in the company of Beatrice. And Virgil is an extraordinary figure for a variety of reasons, okay? Psychologically, Virgil is important because he represents rationality. Psychologically, he's important in the simplest sense, and I'm talking once again about that back-footed present-day experience of Dante. He's important because Dante absolutely adores Virgil. He's pored over Virgil's books since he was a school kid, okay? He's the master, he's the person who has made Dante want to be a poet, okay? And most peculiarly, he talks about him not simply as my master, the person who's instructed me, okay, in how to be a poet, but he says, you're my master and my author, as if Virgil himself had written Dante into being. And I think in that there's an important clue to which I'm going to come back at the very end of my speech, which is coming up soon, you can all relax a little bit, whatever. And that is the fact that Dante himself sees himself to some extent as prophesied by Virgil, insofar as Dante's vision of this nazione that's going to come into being tra feltro e feltro is a vision of Italy, and it is the vision first constituted in the Aeneid by which Virgil constitutes the mythopoeic vision of the foundation of the Roman state of antiquity, which eventually becomes, as it were, the Roman Empire, by first conquering the whole of the Italian peninsula, and then, of course, various parts of the world, right up to northern Britain, right down to Israel and Egypt, and so on and so forth, and across to Carthage, and we all know about the Roman Empire. So to some extent, what Dante's hinting at in saying that Virgil is my author, okay, he's saying that to a certain extent, Virgil has taught me, he's my master, how to be a poet, but he is my author because he has placed me at a certain point in the middle of history, to which he was the beginning, to carry on the work of the epic which Virgil began in constituting the foundation of the brilliance of the nazione, this new kind of word. Okay, we mustn't forget that Italy is nothing like a nation at this stage. Okay, it is an agglomeration of warlike states or whatever, fighting one another and squabbling from commune to commune in the most appalling fashion. Okay, but Dante has this vision of a greyhound of all strange things, okay, which is going to drive away, it's going to drive away this avaricious wolf, the she-wolf, which promiscuously mates with everything in generating a kind of rampant carnal quest for materiality and for wealth and for being and power and so on and so forth. Somewhere along the way, there's going to come this other strange animal, this prophecy of Virgil's, the Veltro, which is going to drive away this la bestia senza pace, okay, which is the great affliction, right, of this contestatory, fighting, warlike Italy, which is the contestation in Dante's own psyche, which is dragging him through a midlife crisis, which is, relax a little bit here, because the first commentary that was ever produced on Dante was produced by none other than Boccaccio. And Boccaccio said of this particular line that he didn't have the faintest idea what it meant. Okay? We can relax. Okay? How can a nation be born between felt and felt? The strange soft substance, okay, which is the scuffing up of bits of wool or whatever, makes no sense whatsoever. And there have been any number of theories advanced to try and explain what it is that Dante is really trying to say. How is a greyhound, okay, which is of course the traditional animal used in the hunting of wolves, which were very real in the Italian peninsula at that particular time, how is this particular greyhound, okay, going to emerge between felt and felt? It just doesn't make any sense at all. And yet in many ways it does, because felt is the plucking of wool, and wool comes from the lamb, and the lamb is the Lamb of God. We begin to start getting those kind of Christocentric philosophical hints that go along the way. Jacopo, the son of Dante, said that he was referring to the places Feltre e Montefeltro, okay, as a region from which he was perceiving Italy to be conceived. Forse, we can't say for any degree of certainty. Okay, others have said that he was envisaging the felt cloth, okay, of the Franciscan order, okay, and suggesting that it was going to be the humble orders, okay, of the revisionary Catholic Church or whatever, no longer corrupted by the kind of plenitude and pomp and ceremony of the High Middle Ages, who would redeem Italy and begin this new nation humbled before God, and so on and so forth. Maybe, and so on and so forth. Paper was made in the Middle Ages, and it was used. And Dante certainly knew how it was made, and in all likelihood, I am suggesting, in the wake of others, if Dante did not compose his poem, or if Dante's poem was not first circulated on paper, which it wasn't, it was first circulated on vellum and in parchment written down, nonetheless, there is every likelihood that the material, the medium on which Dante first composed the poem, scribbled down the notes in his terza rima that constitute the poems we have in front of us today, was in all likelihood paper, okay? Rather as papyrus, from which we get the word paper, was used to scribble down notes in ancient Egypt, okay? And then was thrown aside, okay? As a highly, as it were, a highly, what's the word? Temporary kind of substance altogether. And one of the extraordinary attributes of paper is that once the paper pulp is made, and it was made, of course, at Fabriano, okay, in Italy, and is still made. There's one of the oldest marks in the world, Fabriano. Many of you got Quaderno from Fabriano. That is a mark that is over 700 years old. It dates back to Dante's time, okay? When paper is made, okay, the paper that comes out wet and pulpy, all right, from the smashing process that generates paper. And remember that paper initially was not made from wood pulp like this, which is useless paper and turns brown, as you know your old books do. It oxidizes quickly. Old paper, all right, was made from leftover clothes. The rag and bone men of medieval Europe would go around calling out rags and bones, and people would give their rags and bones to the rag and bone men. And the rags that were used were largely, okay, secondarily used sanitary towels, okay, from the stripped clothing, okay, of medieval women would have been using it in that sense. So it was a very, very recycled kind of process. Before these things were macerated in water, higher up the Alps the better, right, and eventually squashed into a pulp. But then you're left with a wet pulp. How do you dry it out? You take the wet pulp and you insert it between two pages of a highly absorbent material called feltro. Paper is born tra feltro e feltro. And it is in that sense that perhaps we can argue that the veltro, the greyhound that races ABA, BCB, DCD, EFE, all the way through the terza rima, charging and running and looping and hounding down the sin, chasing after the beatific vision, all the way through Dante's poem, is the poem itself. That what is going to rescue and humble Italy is the beatific vision that Dante is himself inscribing on a piece of paper that had its birth, nasci tra feltro e feltro. And I'll leave it on that. Thank you very much.
I don't have any sort of word. The only word now I can connect between my mind and my mouth is strabiliante. Strabiliante for the performance of Mara, it's unbelievable. It's the only word, unbelievable. And then the explanation of the professor. If I go back when I was in school and thinking about Dante, wow, I'm thinking hour of sleeping because it was so annoying. And now I discovered something sparkly, bubbly, interesting. It's unbelievable interesting. And it's, I don't think solely for me, but for everyone, it was extremely, extremely interesting about, all these sort of, not interpretation, or vision you give to us. Thank you so much. I hope we can read something about Mara Boccaccio, read Mara Boccaccio,
Certo.
because Mara is a very talented poet. I can say, or something more. She's a very talented. Probably the next time is Mara read Mara. That's it. You can arrange. Thank you so much for this performance. Thank you so much for the support for everything. And thank you to everyone is here. Thank you so much.